Okay, let's dive into this. Today, we're taking a journey back to the very beginning. And I don't just mean human history, but the beginning of existence itself. At least, according to one of the most complex and awe-inspiring ancient cultures, the Egyptians. We're going to explore a figure who is absolutely foundational to their entire understanding of reality, yet he remains incredibly mysterious. We are looking at the mythology of Noon. I want you to start by asking yourself a pretty mind-bending question. Imagine the absolute void. Long before time even began ticking, before the concept of space existed, before the Earth was formed or the stars were ignited, what was there? Just picture that literal nothingness, pitch black, utterly silent, with no up, no down, and no boundaries. How did ancient people, thousands of years ago, without modern telescopes or physics, how did they conceptualize and visualize the literal nothingness that preceded creation? It's a heavy philosophical puzzle, right? Well, for the ancient Egyptians, the answer to that cosmic puzzle was none. Sometimes you'll see it spelled N-U-N. Now, Nun wasn't just simply a god who controlled water, like he's not a Poseidon figure. He was the literal personification of the primordial watery abyss. Think of Nun as the infinite, chaotic, dark ocean that existed before the dawn of creation. Now, to understand why they chose water, you kind of have to look at how they lived. The ancient Egyptians lived and died by the annual flooding of the Nile River. Water was the ultimate source of life, bringing fertile soil, but it was also a terrifying, totally uncontrollable force of chaos that could wash away whole villages. So naturally, they envisioned the ultimate source of everything, the deep, formless void from which all reality and even the creator gods themselves emerged, as this infinite dark water. To really grasp how the Egyptians thought about this, we have to look at their language. The ancient Egyptians were absolute masters of clever wordplay, and they were constantly using it to layer deep theological meaning into their texts. In fact, their ancient texts explicitly say, "I raise them up from out of the watery mass, out of inactivity." In their language, the very name Noon, or Nu, is intentionally paralleled with the word Nin, which translates to inactivity. Noon is quite literally the inert one. It perfectly describes a state of dormant, motionless potential, just a completely still ocean waiting for a spark. What's even more fascinating from a historical perspective is that this linguistic root survived for millennia. The much later Coptic word noun directly translates to abyss or deep. Now, Nun wasn't just floating out there entirely alone in the conceptual dark. He is the primary and most foundational figure among what is known as the Ogdoad. The Ogdoad is a crucial concept in ancient Egyptian religion. It refers to a specific group of exactly 8 deities. But these weren't, friendly, approachable gods who you prayed to for a good harvest. No, these 8 divine figures were raw, terrifying, elemental forces. Together, they represented the fundamental and limitless primordial chaos that existed before the ordered world took shape. They were the raw materials of existence, basically holding back reality in a suspended animation. I want you to picture what this cosmology actually looked like to an ancient Egyptian. They didn't envision the universe as a vast, ever-expanding vacuum of outer space the way modern astrophysics does. Instead, they conceptualized our known universe, the Earth, the sky, the sun, and the stars, as a remarkably fragile enclosed bubble of life. And completely surrounding that tiny sphere of existence, an endless, incomprehensible, dark oceanic mass. It's a truly awe-inspiring thought. This was the deepest mystery of their cosmogony. Humanity, the gods, and everything we know are merely a tiny pocket of air and light suspended within the infinite, crushing waters of none. Okay, let's move to and see how this builds. So, how exactly do we get from that dark, terrifying water to the vibrant, sun-drenched world of the pharaohs? Well, it happens in a highly visual, dramatic sequence. Imagine it unfolding step by step. First, we have the endless, motionless waters of Noon. Then, breaking the surface tension, a primeval pyramid-shaped mound of land, called the Benben, pushes up through the dark waves. Next, resting on that primeval muddy mound, a single lotus flower blossoms. And finally, bursting forth from that pristine lotus, the glorious sun god Ra emerges, throwing light, heat, and order out across the new cosmos. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the Egyptians didn't have one strict dogmatic story for this event. Mythology was incredibly fluid back then. Think of it almost like a modern comic book multiverse. Depending on where and when you lived, the origin story shifted. Across different regions and eras, we see incredibly diverse versions of the sun's grand emergence. Sometimes it was the goddess Mehet-Waret, depicted as a massive cow with a sun disk resting between her horns, who gave birth to the sun right out of the watery abyss.
Other times, the sun emerged directly from the dirt of the primeval mount itself. When springing from the lotus flower, the sun might take the form of a heron, a falcon, a scarab beetle, or even a glowing human child. And in the city of Heliopolis, their brilliant philosophers taught that the creator god Autumn actually existed silently within the waters of Nun as pure, inert potential. He essentially thought himself into existence before sparking the universe into being.
This incredibly rich theology presents a massive anthropological challenge, though. Think about it. If you're an ancient Egyptian artist tasked with painting the walls of a grand tomb or writing an intricate papyrus scroll, how on earth do you visually depict an oceanic void, right? How do you grab a paintbrush and draw something that is, by its very definition, endless nothingness, formless and chaotic? They had to find a highly creative way to put a recognizable face on the absolute infinite. So they solved this artistic challenge by embracing a fascinating gender duality, which was actually a standard practice for all the elemental concepts within the Ogdoad. First, we have the male aspect, Nun, written with a male gender ending in their hieroglyphs. He was often depicted as a frog or a frog-headed man. And if you think about the Nile flooding again, this makes perfect sense. When the chaotic floodwaters receded, frogs would literally spring out of the wet mud, making them the ultimate symbols of life emerging from primordial water. He could also appear as a bearded man with blue-green skin to represent the depths. Conversely, we have his consort, the female aspect, Naunet, written with a female gender ending. She was typically represented as a snake or a snake-headed woman, another creature deeply associated with the wet earth and primordial origins. Together, the frog and the snake form the totality of the abyss. And this brilliantly illustrates that Nun wasn't just a passive backdrop to the universe. He was the muscular foundation keeping reality afloat. Once creation happened, Nun played a vital, active, and physically demanding role in maintaining the cosmos. In the art, you'll often find Nun depicted as a large anthropomorphic figure holding a notched palm branch. One of his most crucial roles is seen when he powerfully lifts the solar barque, the boat carrying the sun disk, aloft from the waters of creation. Sometimes he even appears as a baboon, loudly greeting the rising sun. A spectacular, defining example of this is found in the 12th hour of the mystical Book of Gates. Here, Nun is shown standing deep in the primordial water with his arms raised high. You can almost feel the physical strain as he holds up the boat that carries the morning sun god Khepri, along with 7 other deities, safely up into the sky. Because of this immense cosmic importance, beginning in the Middle Kingdom, Nun earned the ultimate theological title, the Father of the Gods. Now, you'd naturally assume the literal creator of reality, the Father of the Divine, would get the most extravagant monuments in all of Egypt. Maybe a sprawling mega-temple complex or giant dedicated pyramid, right? But here we arrive at an incredible paradox. Despite his supreme foundational status, Nun didn't have a single dedicated temple. There were no grand cult centers. Literally not one stone structure was ever built exclusively to worship the Father of the Gods. So the crucial point is, the Egyptians realized a profound truth. You simply cannot put a roof over infinity. How exactly do you revere a god without a temple? Well, they recognized that Nun was omnipresent in the very element he represented. Rather than trying to confine him in a standard grand temple, his presence was actively felt and worshipped at the sacred, massive lakes constructed within major temple complexes like Karnak and Dendara. Even more awe-inspiring, at the holy site of Abydos, he was represented by deep, mysterious underground streams. Imagine standing in the cool, dark sanctuary of Abydos, listening to the water flowing deep beneath the earth, and believing you're literally standing in the presence of the physical body of the creator god. His sanctuary wasn't built of carved stone. It was the living water of the earth itself. But, religion and mythology are never perfectly static. They absorb the anxieties and terrors of the people living them. As we move into the late period of Egyptian history, the actual country faced severe turbulence. They were hit with devastating foreign occupations, their culture was threatened, and their world was effectively crumbling. During this incredibly dark time, the cosmic perception of Nun began to shift drastically. The theological focus moved away from his role as a supportive, life-giving creator. Instead, his negative aspect became the dominant perception. The endless chaotic waters of Nun began to reflect the terrifying, uncontrollable forces of negative disorder and chaos that had been literally loosed upon their civilization by invading armies. And this dark shift brings our narrative arc to a rather chilling and apocalyptic conclusion. Woven deeply into the theology of this watery abyss is a final, inevitable prophecy.
It was believed that the protective bubble of our universe wouldn't last forever. Nun, the very god that provided the gentle foundation for existence to spark, is also the god prophesied to eventually destroy it all. At the end of time, the order of the world will fail. The fragile bubble will burst. The cosmic waters will rush back in, and absolutely everything, every person, every god, every memory, will be returned to the dark, silent nothingness of none, from whence it came.
It is a profound, almost modern existential concept wrapped up in ancient mythology. It forces a massive shift in how you view reality. So I want to leave you with this lingering thought to ponder. If all of reality, every grand monument we build, every single life we lead, every stress we carry, is just a temporary, fragile bubble encapsulated in an endless, chaotic ocean of pure potential, what does that mean for the world we are building today? Thank you for exploring the deep waters with me in this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.